Hello and welcome to Econoday Unplugged. It's Tuesday, 15th of January 2019. I'm Jeremy Hawkins here in London, where all eyes are firmly focused on this evening's parliamentary Brexit vote, which promises to be, once again, a defining moment in the future relationship between the UK and the rest of the EU. And if all the uncertainty surrounding that isn't enough, then, well, just last week, the World Bank issued its new forecast entitled Darkening Skies. So it's just as well then that with me as usual on the other side of the pond, fully charged flashlight in hand, is our US expert, Mark Pender.
That's me.
Greetings to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Greetings
to you. Greetings to you.
Now, we normally kick off with a look at what's happening stateside, but since we've got this Brexit vote, and indeed, as we speak, it's just a matter of hours away, I guess it seems kind of sensible to start here first. So then, what are we looking for? Well, the vote itself should be finishing round about 8:15 p.m. London time. So that's going to be, 3:15, 3:15 in the afternoon, East Coast New York time. So
is there any chance it'll pass?
Well, this is it. I mean, in terms of what's expected, let's say in a nutshell, if you look at what the government is presenting this time compared to what it presented to the Commons what it should have presented back into the Commons in December, and it pulled that vote because it thought it was going to lose. And to all intents and purposes, these bills are pretty well exactly the same. So by far and away, the market expectation is that we'll see the Prime Minister being defeated and potentially being defeated significantly. And I think in terms of, the takeaway from today's vote, I guess, will be the extent to which she is beaten. Were we, let's say, to see a defeat of, in excess of 100, then it may be the case that she could feel obliged to stand down.
So there's 400 or so in the votes. How many votes are there?
Well, that's right. It's around about just over 350 votes. So not everyone's necessarily going to vote, but is
she going to get any Labour votes?
Yes, she will do. Because this is not just a case of being split between the Tories and the opposition parties, but of course it's a cross-party split as well. So Labour's split between those who want to stay in the EU and those who want to leave. Ditto for the government as well.
But they want to remove her. So why would Labour vote if they want to trigger an election? Wouldn't it be in Labour's interest then not to vote, even if they do support her view there?
Well, it would be. The issue is, I think, is that when it comes down to Brexit, it almost ignores the political borders. Those who believe that Brexit should happen, and needs to do everything, whatever it takes to get Brexit to happen, and those people who think we should remain in the European Union, again, irrespective of what that might or might not mean for the shape of the future government. So, it really is a polarisation of, the country as a whole, but in particular Parliament as well. But I think it does seem certain to the extent that anything is certain in politics, and let's be honest, who would trust what a politician says anyway, that the government, or at least Mrs May, will lose. So the question then is, if that were to be the case, what happens next? Well, the honest answer to that is, of course, is we don't know. But a few things that we do know is that the government would have to come back to Parliament within 3 days with a plan B. Now, to all intents and purposes, they don't actually appear to have a plan B in the first place, which is hardly
So how can they make it up in 3 days? They passed this like a week or so ago. Haven't they been working on this 3-day plan? They can't. It's taken 3 years now. How can they come up with something in 3 days?
Well, originally they were expecting that if they were to lose the vote today, they would have at least 21 days to try and come up with some kind of amendments which would make it more acceptable to Parliament. But as a result of an amendment which went through the Commons last week, so that's now been reduced to just 3 days. What it means is, in reality, I expect if we get to that sort of situation, then the parliamentary debate will be extended beyond 3 days, because you quite rightly say they're not going to be able to settle anything within such a short period of time. I suppose it's worth mentioning that, if Mrs May survives this vote, and were she to lose, let's say, by 100 plus, and the chances are that we could see, Labour's already promised at some point a vote of confidence in the government, and they tried to put a vote of confidence in Mrs May through before Christmas time, but that didn't really stand for that much. But they are talking now about a vote of confidence in the government if May loses by enough. So clearly
Jeremy, can I ask, is there anyone on either side who has a vision on how to get a deal done that the majority would agree on? Is there anyone they're turning to, that they're looking at, who has the wherewithal, he or she, who can get this, who can get this done?
And therein lies the issue, because as we currently speak, there is no majority in Parliament for any plan that's actually been put on the table. Labour has come out with some vague recommendations about what they think would be suitable, but that's all got to be agreed with the EU, and they probably wouldn't agree it in the first place. The Brexiteers amongst the Conservative Party, their view is, well, they don't really want a hard Brexit, but again, they don't have any kind of compromise bill which can get through Parliament either.
So it's a hard Brexit. Is that what I mean? What are the odds? What are the playmakers in London doing?
Outside the Irish backstop, the real backstop is that no one really wants the hard Brexit. And that's not just for UK, it's also the European Union as well, because a hard Brexit is essentially going to be bad news for everyone. So I think at the moment, in terms of where the betting lies, is that, well, Mrs May will lose the vote today. That's kind of a done deal. What happens then? Well, I think you could well see... My bet is you'll see an extension of the Article 50 March deadline. So currently, don't forget that the default position here is that unless something changes, then the UK will leave the European Union on March the 29th. So something has to change for that not to happen under UK law. So I think if Mrs May loses, we'll see, and there's enough, I guess, of a kind of a majority within Parliament that wants to see either a soft Brexit or some kind of deal anyway.
Is there a leader? Is there a personality that everyone is looking? Well, then what do the bookies say? It looks like a hard Brexit to me, right?
Well, this is it. See, the bookies don't really know. All they, I think, read, as much as anybody else, they're prepared to come down on the side of the longer this goes on, probably the greater is the likelihood that there won't be a hard Brexit or there won't be a no deal Brexit, because Parliament is going to take over the process. If Parliament itself takes over the process, then Parliament on average either wants to stay in the EU, which they probably do, or certainly wants to have a soft Brexit. So what I think will happen is that we'll get the UK requesting, and it has to come from the UK, that the Article 50 March deadline will be extended. Now, it can be extended so long as all the other EU member countries say yes. And since the other EU member countries ideally want to get some kind of Brexit deal rather than no deal, it's probably in their interest as well. So for what it's worth, and I say it really is, it's anybody's guess. And I think the chances are that as far as today's concerned, we're going to end up with a situation under which we get a lot of politicking taking place in Parliament. Parliament itself tries to take over the Brexit process, and to drive it away from the Prime Minister, who may or may not survive to tonight's vote anyway, and see what happens from there.
Well, can I ask, is there any authorities, any personality outside of Parliament, political? I mean, a writer, Paul McCartney, Mick Jagger. I mean, is there a court? Is there anything else? The Royals don't participate in politics, I guess, or the House of Lords. Is there anybody outside of Parliament, a journalist, anybody that people are a writer, anybody that people are focusing on?
Well, not really. If you take the sort of, the celeb stars, I think it's fair to say you can pretty well draw a line through that lot as well. For every person who, waves a Union Jack and says, right, we want Brexit, we want to go back to being, Britain again and control all our own borders and, parliamentary powers, etc., etc. But there's someone on the other side of the fence who very much wants to remain part of the European Union. So it's something which it's almost getting to the stage now whereby a number of commentators are saying there's no way out of this, because it's hard to see how Parliament would vote, on any particular package. But since it doesn't want a no deal, it kind of comes down on this thing whereby we end up as we are. And I think if you're looking at performance of, the way the pound's performing at the moment, the UK stock markets, it's sort of coming down on that view. It's not confident that, we won't fall out of Brexit. That clearly is still very much a possibility. But, there's this growing sense that because people can't agree anything in terms of what the final shape should take, we'll end up with extended negotiation and we just keep going forward on that manner.
Well, it doesn't sound very promising.
It does.
It's been
it doesn't.
And so let's talk about what a hard Brexit means for the global economy. I mean, will it immediately throw What's its actual legal impact on British imports and exports?
Well, the legal impact, of course, is that we will no longer be part of the customs union or the European single market, which ought to mean that automatically we'll see an increase in tariffs, but an introduction on tariffs on those goods and services which have been freely traded between the UK and the European Union. So the UK will raise tariffs on EU goods and services, the EU will raise tariffs or introduce tariffs on UK goods and services. At the same time as the issue, of course, as part of the EU, the UK has had access to the trade agreements that the European Union has made with non-EU countries, and there's a ton of those. And it's questionable as to whether or not, since we're no longer part of the EU, those trade agreements would actually continue to operate with the UK.
So it's going to be a legal mess. So if April rolls around, it's going to be a feast day for the lawyers in Europe and the UK?
It was. Yeah, I think if you got someone who's sort of graduating from college and wants to know what kind of job to go into, something in kind of a lawyer type sphere could actually be an extremely good one to take.
Well, now how about traders and economists? What does it mean for financial London as a financial global center?
Well, it's got to be negative. I mean, we've already seen a degree of movement out from the City of London into Dublin in particular. The UK is being used as an entry point into the European Union for both investment flows in particular, but also as an access to the European free market. It looks as if a fair chunk of that has already started being moved across into Dublin, which of course, being Southern Ireland, will remain part of the European Union.
Well, it's foreign exchange. London is traditionally a dominant center. Have you seen movement out of that market?
There has been, but London, has become the global centre of foreign exchange, partly because of its location. It's got the best time zone. It's also got all the infrastructure. The intellectual capital, etc., and that won't disappear overnight. But of course, it's something which presumably will diminish over time if we're outside of the European Union. So it's going to be a negative, I think, whatever happens. Certainly, it could be a big hit to the UK economy, but it'll also be a hit to the EU as well.
And what's it done to the FTSE? What's it done?
Well, the FTSE's come down on the back of it's underperformed over the course of the last year or so, but during the course of the last few months, initial worries about a hard Brexit have tended to fade away, and there's been this increasing hope that either Theresa May will get a deal through, which would mean basically a softer Brexit than might otherwise have been the case, or indeed we don't actually leave in the first place. So at the moment, I think the stock market is being bid up on the hopes that, well, perhaps at the end of the day, it won't look quite as bad as it might have done otherwise.
Well, if they do call for a no confidence, how does this work? If they do call for a new election, when would that occur, and how would that affect this deadline?
Well, what would happen first would be the opposition parties would have to table a vote of no confidence in the government. If the government were to win that vote, and it's quite possible that they could do, then effectively nothing changes and we're back to where we are now. If the government loses it, then they are obliged to call a general election, and we'll be having a general election in perhaps 3 months' time, something like that. But of course,
what is the risk of some kind of a market evacuation? A sudden movement, all of a sudden, a sharp, sudden movement in the financial markets, whether it's the pound or stocks.
I think I must say, if it suddenly becomes apparent that there's going to be a no-deal Brexit, then you would see the pound being sold off aggressively. You'd probably see the UK stock market being hit aggressively as well. Now, some of those flows will probably go into the European Union, the Eurozone, but to the extent that it's not good news for the Eurozone either, it's going to be a big positive probably for the dollar, and probably for the likes of the Japanese yen as well, and the likes of perhaps the Swiss franc.
Interesting. Wow, I tell you.
Okay, now look, that I think is probably enough on Brexit for the moment, but I think
I don't know. This is a big issue.
It is, but you've got a big issue your side, which I think
the government shutdown.
I've got to ask you about this good old government shutdown, which is longest in history now, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, and there's really no end in sight here. And what that means for economic data is it's cutting down calculations for GDP. That means consumer spending. We're going to miss retail sales tomorrow, which is going to be for December. So, and that, of course, is the most important, one of the most important reports every year on the economic calendar is December retail sales. That's gone. Inventories are gone. Information on inventories, information on trade, information on new home sales, which for residential investment, information on capital goods, business investment. These are all, critical pieces of GDP. What we are getting, though, is the Labor Department's open through September. That's the government's fiscal year. They've already been funded. So we're getting employment data and we're getting inflation data. And those two are the actual things that the Fed by policy actually looks at. They don't really turn their policy decisions on GDP. Of course, it's very important, but they'll have enough to conduct policy. But what's interesting is we're getting weekly jobless claims, and they'll be coming out on Thursday. And the last week we saw a small uptick, several thousand, almost 4,000 federal workers. And this apparently are furloughed workers applying for and receiving initial benefits. However, our Conaday forecasting sample, isn't seeing any risk of that increasing in the weekly numbers coming out on Thursday. 221,000 is the Econoday consensus, and this is also for the week that will be that ends in the 12th. That will be for the sample for the monthly employment report. So if that is stable, it would look like the employment report for January would be stable. So it would be an invisible kind of thing, at least for this 1 month, if the forecasts hold. But that's a big question. So
yeah, have there been any updates on sort of a consumer or business confidence as a result of what's going on?
Well, we've had, it's a good question. It's hard to read. We had the Empire State Report this morning, and it was very soft, almost showing no growth. The weakest reading in a couple of years. But this is a small sample of maybe 100 or so manufacturers in the New York area, and it's basically a measure of sentiment in the sense that the sample is asked, a series of questions, month-to-month change, and there's no guarantee that they're actually looking at the books, the respondents on this. They're just going off the top of their head. And so you do get a sentiment kind of coloring to it, but you don't know. I mean, it's a hard reading to make a judgment. But the factory numbers, we are going to get industrial production that's assembled by the Federal Reserve. That'll be out on Friday, and that'll be for December on the manufacturing sector. That'll have a big component in there, and that'll be a hard number. But the forecasters see another very weak reading. The U.S. manufacturing sector appears to have stumbled at year end, and really it's not clear other than the vague kind of a notion of global slowing. But exports, there's a big domestic market in the United States, and a change in exports really wouldn't make this kind of a shift that we're seeing. And so it's really hard to put your finger on. There appears to be a slowing in the factory sector. Like I said, though, the consumer sector is an unknown, and the readings we have on December are things like credit card rates and a small sample and anecdotal things. And these are all always unreliable, and so you really need to have retail sales, which we're not going to get. Right. So we don't really know what the consumer is going to, we're going to get the consumer sentiment at the end of the week, and then we'll have consumer confidence that may give us a clue. But what this government shutdown has done economically, it's so much like the trade issues and the trade war issues. It's just, however important economic data is, and however elaborate and thorough it is, it's really been very, very hard to find a really persuasive, convincing set of data that can say one thing or another.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I guess then that's probably just about enough for this week. So what have we got then? 2.5 years after the UK decided to leave the European Union, we face a vote that could reshape Europe. Or it may do nothing at all. As politics go, this episode really is one for the history books, and that's not just our side of the pond, it's clearly what's happening in the States as well. So much to look forward to, much to talk about next week, I suspect. So on behalf of Mark and myself, thanks as always for listening, and we will be back next week. Bye for now.